My name is Kiro Zarad. I'm from the Office of Medical Policy at the FDA, the Center for Drugs. I'm really excited to be with all of you. My office actually works around decentralized clinical trials, DHTs, the digital health tools, and GCB. A lot of very fascinating areas that the discussion was really quite substantial around those topics. So again, excited to be with all of you today. Let's start our session with everybody can start with their name and their affiliation, if you don't mind. And Barbara, may I pick on you to start?
Sure. My name is Barbara Beer. I'm the professor of medicine and pediatrics at Harvard Medical School and the Brigham and Women's Hospital, and the faculty director of the Multi-Regional Clinical Trial Center at Harvard.
Thank you. Megan, do you want to start next? Or anybody?
Sorry about that. I was changing rooms. Hi, I'm Megan O'Boyle, the parent of a child with a rare genetic disorder, the PI of Phelan-McDermott Syndrome International Registry, and patient engagement lead for Rare X, a nonprofit.
Thank you. I don't want to go through names, but Anne, maybe you next, and everybody who would like to join after that, please jump in.
Okay. Yes, hi, I'm Anne Trontel from the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. I work in the Office of Science, but closely with colleagues in engagement.
Welcome.
I'm Elena Rios, and president of the National Hispanic Medical Association.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, everybody.
Marilyn, Alexis McCline.
Go ahead.
Sorry, done.
Great talk also, by the way, or comment.
Thank you.
I'm Jody Aiken. I'm the founder and CEO of an emerging organization called Hawthorne Effect. It's a technology-enabled distributed health service to enable patients participate in clinical trials anywhere, anytime. And the entire goal is to reach communities that are otherwise not participating in research as well. So long career in clinical research, leading organizations and clinical research globally. So I'm really, really excited about this forum.
Welcome. Thank you. Who's next?
Hi, I'm Doris Brown, past president of the National Medical Association, and the lead for its project Impact 2.0, which is a reinvigoration of our project to include minority participation in clinical trials.
Thank you. Have we missed anybody? Marilyn, maybe it's you or?
I almost overlapped, but didn't quite, so we're good, thanks.
Sure. Did we miss anybody else here?
Andrew?
Hi, I'm Andrew March, and I'm an associate program officer with the National Academies staff.
Thank you, Andrew. And Evan is helping us as well. Evan, do you want to introduce yourself? Thank you, Evan. So the discussion today was very rich. We're tasked with the question that you heard. I'm going to repeat it for you, and maybe Evan, if you can project it for us just to kind of get us to contemplate on it. The question is, what are the 1 to 2 long-term tangible and measurable goals to ensure a more person-centered and inclusive clinical trial enterprise that should be met within the next 10 years? I know we previously discussed 5 years, now 10 years. And the goals below them are for us to consider, we've heard about building a sustained clinical trial network that invests into communities over the long term, and then re-examining the role of contract research organization, and then the potentially other long-term goals as well. Before we jump to the next question, let's focus on this one a little bit. And I think there's a lot to be said here. And, just the last 3 talks, there are quite a bit of thoughts here, but we have to select nonetheless a tangible and measurable goal or goals and start discussing them from the point of view, how do we achieve them, and how do we measure progress, and what stakeholders have to be involved for us to get there, if you would. Anybody would like to comment on that?
I have to jump off in a second, so I'll just offer this in terms of that first point is, clinical trial going in and out of communities. We need you now, and then we're gone, and we need you again, and then we're gone. that point of stability and kind of an ongoing presence in the clinical trial enterprise being part of community and regionally based health equity initiatives writ large. That's a big missing piece there, and can go and partner with those, whether it's the Boston Breast Cancer Health Equity Consortium or the Philadelphia Health Equity Collaborative. They're all over the country, but the clinical trials piece is missing from there. And if it were just to be included with that, I think that would be a constant platform, a presence in the community, part of the larger effort that then clinical trials can be seen as an extension of and as part of driving health equity ultimately, but really with continuous engagement with the community. But those platforms are underutilized and unconnected to by clinical trial enterprise, as far as I can tell.
I think your comment is really wide-reaching. May I ask you, I think of pragmatic trial or trials with pragmatic elements as they describe them. I think you're describing something much larger than that, more at the infrastructure level, where clinical trials are automatically part of the center, right? The community center.
Well, I think just you can run a list of all of these health equity coalitions that have been created and just connect with them from have the clinical trial community connect with them to better explain the value of the clinical trials to those overall efforts as well. But right now it's a drop in and drop out rather than really being strongly part of them on an ongoing basis.
Thank you for that.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else would like to follow that?
I can just say that I think I would like to see that in 10 years, all of our trials represent the sort of the prevalence and burden of disease appropriately by demographic and including social determinants of health, and that we have sufficient information about each of those diseases and or conditions to inform the ideal participation in clinical trials, and that we execute on that, and wherein there is no condition that it at a minimum represents that the population for whom the intervention is intended, or in the case of such as vaccines, etc., at a minimum, the population being served.
Thank you.
And we're a far cry from any of that.
Yeah, I think the discussion around that is like how many factors we need to work on to get there. Go ahead.
I have another, sort of what I said earlier was about the mentoring piece between senior and junior investigators, senior meaning those experienced in clinical trials that may be at large academic health centers, but the new investigators being really community-based. And I think that along with mentoring, there's got to be an educational campaign to community. And what I mean by community is not the healthcare workers themselves, but the participants or the subjects that are, I'll just say, in a lot of Hispanics, for example, and African Americans that have so much less access to care aren't in the healthcare system. They're not being told to go to clinical trials. I think a media campaign that is outside of the healthcare system needs to normalize the situation that there are ways to get into clinical trials to help your families learn about knowledge about it's like the All of Us program that we're involved with. And I think that needs to be part of this long-term goal, is to let more people know about the enterprise that we think is just inside an academic health center, which it shouldn't be. So anyway, I'll just stop there.
No, I totally agree with that. I think for many years, as I'm watching technology grow, and the idea that like the technology community, digital health community is focused on finding patients or scraping data or doing sort of digital ascertainments about population outcomes. And what's always disturbed me about that is the ascertainment bias of who's missing, the populations that are actually not represented in healthcare in the first place. They're not insured. And so this fear I have as both a researcher and humanitarian is that we're basing outcomes on continuing to be underrepresented. So one of my aspirations, and I don't think it's 10-year, I missed the 5-year discussion, but is really to turn the lens on patients as the quote heroes of clinical research. And I think that COVID really brought to light that it's, the patients that participated in those trials that were brave enough to do so. That's the reason we're accelerating the vaccines, right? So the science is wonderful, but without that active participation. And so how do we leverage that message to patients that you really are the last mile in medical innovation and improving care? And so I think the road over 10 years is really, we've all been trying to switch the light onto patients, but really having not the doctors, their referring doctors understand clinical trials, but have the patients understand that their participation, regardless of their outcome, is contributing to humanity, even above and beyond themselves. So this is sort of something I focus on a lot, or would like to share, a roadway for.
Thank you. Thank you. Go ahead.
This is Megan. Just two quick things. One, all of us is just so much of an opportunity to learn. So I hope that this community has representation from all of us, so that we're not reinventing the wheel in the next 10 years, and we're learning from what has been invested in that program, because I know that a lot of effort has been put into making sure that they reach out to all communities. And the second point I think has just totally left my brain.
Well, maybe I can follow up slightly with Judy, you were saying. It reminded me of an old mentor who actually once told me that our responsibility to those participating in the trial is not only to them, but to their community, in a sense that we produce good research ambassadors. If they have a good experience within the trial, they're going to go and discuss that experience with their community. And that could result in additional, contribution from that community. Or on the other hand, if there is a lack of trust or lack of, interaction, we lost not just the person in that case, we potentially lost the community in that sense. So that's really weighs heavy in my mind in that sense.
I totally agree. I mean, I think I love the last presentation, and I have done similar ones showing just historically the focus on inclusivity, pragmatic research, patient centricity. I mean, this has been on our minds for like 30 years. It's not a new concept. And but still today, the representation is what it is, 1% and 2% Latino, African-American, et cetera. So the 21st Century Cures Act actually codified into law, really saying this is a mandate, but still, so, why are we not breaking down those boundaries? And I think it's because we need to be in the communities. We have to go from the communities outwards, democratize research, make it accessible, make the participants, and I love that term, by the way, of the health minister, in the church. This is, I think, we have to build that trust, from the community outwards and not the other way around. So how do we articulate some real clear goals around that?
Thank you. Very interesting.
We've heard from many people, and in PCORI, where we're so invested, and where I think we've really led the way in a lot of engagement activities, we have purposefully invested in these communities, and we're hearing about it. We're hearing about what Jody is doing and what others, but the recognition that we're kind of building this network and infrastructure, first of all, of relationships, which is what we're talking about today. But there are larger opportunities. Say we've tried to construct a network of research centers that work with patient groups together. So it's so hard to tease out what to do first. But I think the nature of an investment in what are priorities, I think, Megan, you said it really powerfully. This might be the 5th thing on my list in terms of what you're trying to do and to accomplishment, and to have mutuality as a key feature of how these communities are brought into the clinical trial enterprise.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And are you all seeing? Go ahead.
Doris,
shall I let Marilyn do it? Well, I was just going to say that the involvement of the community is really important at all levels from the beginning when you have the concept to include them. And I would, as an oncologist, to go back to look at what we did with our clinical research and involving patients on the review process for those grant applications coming through. And then also having that trusted person in the community that's there. And we heard that in the presentations earlier. It's not that you're coming to the community and you're leaving and you're coming and you're leaving. You never give them any follow-up results, but you're actively engaged, and you need to know who your community leaders are. You involve them at every process. You want those researchers to be from the community. You want the results to go back to the community. And you really have to invest in that process and the results so that you have a better outcome. And, you know, it's not new. We've heard it over and over in examples that was used with the HIV/AIDS and all of us, as well as in cancer. And so we need to take the best part of that and do the collaboration and not remain in our silos of industry, providers, consumers. We work together to make the whole, and so you'll come out with a better outcome. Thank you.
Marilyn.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, I've seen some discussion in chats about community advisory boards, which tend to be the solutions that I'm often pointed to when I ask, are patient organizations tending to have more diverse representation now, or do we still need to really reach beyond those? Because those are obviously some of the first places we go, and in some regions, the only places we're allowed to go as sponsors. But that clearly is not reaching all patients. And so just wanted to get some thoughts on how a sponsor is viewed in terms of first approaches to communities versus patient organizations, or if anybody has any more thoughts about that.
The issue with the patient that I brought up, I don't know if this is my, is everybody getting a feedback?
Yeah, a little bit of that, but now it's gone.
Is I brought up earlier is the genetics for diseases that are genetic, but you could spread that wider and say that, you know, certain populations aren't getting referred to specialists so that they're not getting the diagnoses, but the patient organizations themselves, you know, what does our board of directors look like? What do our staff look like? When we have a family conference, who's welcoming people at the door? And if everybody looks the same, then why should, you know, somebody who doesn't look like them or relate to them want to be part of that community? So I think that there's several responsible parties. I'm trying to think of a very novel, innovative, disruptive way of educating people on clinical trials. And I'm not coming up with a good example, but in our micro group of rare disease, we're always saying, let's train families about clinical trials before there is one, because once there is one, they're so emotional, they're going to game the system, they're going to cheat to get in, they're going to talk about it on Facebook. And so if you learn about it before it's a thing, then it's much less emotional. But that's not a one-off. Like, why should each organization, each disease be one-off? And why should each pharmaceutical company have to educate communities? And so I wonder if, like, when you go get your driver's license at 16, you also get information about don't drive drunk, don't text while you drive, and do you want to be an organ donor? When you get a diagnosis, you know, in the United States of America, you are given a diagnosis of X, Y, or Z. Is there something that you can be given? What is a clinical trial? Where can I find clinical trials? What does this mean to me? And most people are going to throw it in the trash, but if you get more awareness early on, before somebody's given a death sentence, then maybe there's more conversation. Patients asking clinicians about clinical trials. So I'm just throwing it out there. We got 10 years, so we got to come up with some big ideas.
Exactly. That's a good start.
Yeah, I think the discussion, we have to switch to question 2 momentarily, but a lot of the discussion really is around building in the community, engaging in the community, investing in the community, normalizing research in the community, and building trust across the board. And I think that sounds like the challenge that we have in the next 10 years, and maybe, putting a little bit more details on how to get there. Maybe the next question will help us a little bit in that. And may I ask you, Andrew or Evan, to just for a minute to put the next question on the screen so everybody can see it briefly.
And while he's doing that, can I just mention, I think we do a disservice in our regular clinical care by not being absolutely clear with, patients about how much we don't know. And what we do know, we know because of clinical trials. And what we don't know, we know because it's sort of based on experience, quote unquote. And nowhere does that come up, either in medical school or in, nursing school, or when you get admitted to the hospital for somebody to say, look, 70% of what you're going to get, we have no idea if it's right or not. So in terms of the campaign for education, it's also in how honest we are about what we know and don't know.
Can I jump on board that? Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to add to that in terms of, certainly from the African American community, when we've done studies with our patients and our providers, and the patients say the reason why they don't participate in a clinical study is because their provider didn't tell them about it. Yeah. And so I agree with you, Barbara, that part of that is going back to train our providers on clinical trials and the importance of them, and then engaging them in the planning so that they can become investigators. Exactly. And that's what the National Medical Association's Project Impact is all about.
Exactly right. And then I think also making it possible for providers to find available trials in a way that is efficient. When they have a 14-minute RVU, that they can do that work, or we make it available to patients to be able to find them themselves and then ask their provider. So
I've also read this in only one article, so I just want to check with you. Is there also a need to build more of an understanding between investigators and clinical practitioners, like everyday clinical practitioners, in the sense of a philosophy between, I don't want my patient randomized to a treatment. I want to do what I think is absolutely best for them versus, I believe in clinical research because, we need to have these answers and this is the way to find it? Or do we need more of a mutual discussion around what everybody feels comfortable as an ethical clinical trial design?
That's
extremely valuable to be able to, first of all, appreciate the constraints of the clinician that you're trying to engage in research, because we all know the available time in real estate to do this is very limited. But the other thing too is that both clinicians and patients, and there's research to bear this out, do not want to believe that they're not certain about what treatments they're giving patients now. And so I think that there's education going on in both arenas, and overcoming the concern about being experimented upon or being some kind of guinea pig, particularly in communities who have been taken advantage of historically. But the challenges is in bringing it out to the community providers, because we've heard from them. They would like to be involved. They'd like to be part of some of those questions. Some of it is just simply space and time to do it.
Mm-hmm. And part of what PCORI has done well, and what we're becoming better at, is that in the past, when a patient became a participant in a clinical trial, they were often lost to their provider, and they were transferred elsewhere, and sometimes didn't go back to their trusted, provider. So that the more we can change in that regard, the better.
Yeah, I think all these points I have a story that there was a big interventional type trial that I was a part of. I led it. It was a randomized trial. And this is about 8 and 10 years ago. It was one of these sort of life-saving things. It was a cardiac thing. And we found that the physicians in the communities did not want to refer their patients for exactly that reason. This is many years ago, and it is a phenomenon, and it is real. I remember how shocking that felt, that the local physician was willing to hang on to that patient because they didn't want to lose them either to the treatment. They were holding out that the treatment would come in their hands and or for follow-up. So that is a really important aspect of all this, is that to create inclusiveness of the physicians themselves, the actual, referring physician or primary care, that they're not losing their patient, that they're getting more continuity of information about their patient. And I have to say it, that they're somehow compensated or included in that clinical trial ecosystem, because either A, they don't have the time or space, as you mentioned, or B, they feel like it's an economic loss, and as well, and that's just real. So I think there's obviously a lot of work in decentralization, and that's one focus of that, is to create opportunities for non-academic clinicians to actually not necessarily be PIs, but be part of the ecosystem and be recognized for that.
Technology, we have 58 seconds.
Sorry, we have to jump to the next question, but this is like, there's so many questions I would like to ask all of you, especially about what the role of education in all of this, and are we getting there in that sense? But the next question we have is, what technologies, tool, or techniques could be transformational to improving inclusiveness and equity in the clinical trial enterprise? And I've been thinking actually personally about this question quite a bit, and I couldn't come with a single technology, but I feel like, take, for example, the situation around COVID, where we start doing much more remote operations, if you will, remote processes. Not just from the point of view of efficiencies, we're doing them right now because of safety and efficiency during COVID, but in the future, would that help us get the trials a little bit closer to the community, potentially in some cases into patients' home, utilizing all available tools? We talk about cell phones and cameras quite a bit, but beyond that, are we able to make that shift? With that, I would like to ask you for your input here regarding the technology itself.
So this is Barbara. I know we're out of time. I do want to say that yes, and yes, but I have a huge concern about the digital divide, and that what we don't do is make the current situation differently worse by excluding those who do not have access or understanding or sort of capacity to avail themselves of technologies.
Great point. Do you think with the ubiquity of cell phones, for example, that's helping that a little bit, or you think that's still?
Well, I think in 10 years it's something we can achieve, but only if we're really intentional about it. And I can tell you, having just come off service, if you deal with the elderly, it's a problem beyond beyond access to a cell phone or an internet or the library. So just to say.
This is another thing that's reared its head at COVID. I mean, the first group that was available was over 65. And in many communities, they don't have access to computers, or they have a flip phone, or they don't know how to use it. So unless they have a family member, in DC, there's actually volunteers that will call them at home and
help them
for them. They're not getting registered for vaccines. So there's got to be some sort of way to centralize. I don't know. Again, can we hook up the barbershops and the beauty parlors and the churches with,
if we ever go back to a barbershop and a beauty parlor? But it is something in 10 years that I think we should make sure we nail.
This is only getting cheaper. Like, technology is just getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. There's absolutely no excuse that we can't find a way to put it in more hands. Again, though, that's where privacy is concerned. Although people are, letting the world follow them around in their phone, they just don't.
And to do that in a trusting way, and not to exclude rural versus urban, which is another divide that we've got to be very thoughtful about as we get, better at inclusion.
Incentives are big. It's how to incentivize everybody who have to make that shift to make it in a way.
Yeah, I have trouble with incentives. I think people should be doing it because it's the right thing to do. And to say somebody needs to be incentivized to treat a person as a person equal to every other person, to me is just, you know, just.
I'm saying incentive at the larger level, at this infrastructure level. How do you incentivize?
All right. Well, then I can look.
Yeah, I mean, listening to the challenges of reaching folks on reservations who have to drive 2 and 3 hours for their care, and you know, internet is not going to get everywhere. So yeah, what else are we going to do? What flexibility and choices are we going to offer? I agree with you. I mean, we clearly have the capability if we're willing to put the effort towards solutions of these kinds, but it's going to take some creativity.
Yeah. Remote visits are transformative, and I think that once we can cross that digital divide, and perhaps those I mean, certainly the prices will come down, and all the companies who want our data to sell us more stuff will probably, you know, work to make more people accessible to their marketing. So I think there's reason to be optimistic that there'll be greater penetration. Our job is to make sure it's equitable and that it doesn't leave pockets of people underserved. But I think that possibility, and then also the technology that will allow appropriate data sharing across all these different platforms, because that will also open up great realms in terms of being able to, you know, find the populations, you know, throughout the nation and elsewhere. So that's more of a technology toward the infrastructure. But
what about piloting something with a group? And I'm going to use the easiest disease I can think of, cystic fibrosis. Sickle cell anemia, where some sort of wearable is provided to the patient population for a study, and things don't go wrong, and there is actually something positive that comes out of it. I think trying to change the world, boil the ocean, whatever, is going to be hard. But if we could pick some, you know, pockets to pilot with and learn from them. I just don't know. I mean, I'm the wrong person to be deciding what conditions. I'm thinking, you know, high blood pressure and diabetes are two very common diseases across all populations, especially underrepresented, and both have wearable devices. And so I'm just thinking something where some investment is made in some pilots, and, you know, we learn from it and the community doesn't get burned.
Yeah. I think we have some you know, we're spread in so many areas, rural, Indian reservations, weight control, obesity control. I think there will be lessons as our research matures and as we're learning, you know, with a significant investment prior to the pandemic in using telehealth as a way to increase reach as well as quality of care. So the larger picture, I wouldn't dare to say. Some of this, the jury is still out, but I think we're pleased to be able to be playing in this space. And I think we're pretty excited about what we may ultimately show. And I think we hope some of the things we've learned just in terms of concrete. We started off with the could you do engagement, to you should do engagement, to now I think our collective experience is informing how to do the engagement and to bring in wider inclusivity.
And it sounds like that will include some, go ahead.
To PCORI's credit, you start from, you must be engaged. And then you can talk about how, what, where, you know, when. But you start from a very different position than a lot of other studies or efforts begin. Sorry, go ahead, Mary.
No, that's huge. It's a great point. I was just going to say those are also diseases that have a lot of social determinants of health factors in there too. So that data, I think, will also be important.
Yeah.
So just going to a point that Megan, you mentioned an idea of a pilot. Like, do you, from your perspective, do you see us like having to lead the way in a specific type of pilots? You know, and what that would look like?
I would leverage something that exists. All of us is a perfect example of something that's on a large scale already set up. There's infrastructure, there's governance. There's buy-in, there's money. I mean, I'm sure there's, you know, it's all budgeted out, but I think, you know, don't start from scratch. pick a program that's already out there. You all probably know of a lot more than I do. I just was involved with all of us. But I
think one aspect to getting to the different underrepresented groups is using the infrastructure of the Office of Minority Health at HHS, which nobody considers research, but it's not. But it is an overarching umbrella to the states, to the regions, to HBCUs, to community-based organizations. It has a long history of looking at strategies in the communities, in all the communities, and there may be a way. I know there's a way with COVID, but I think that, and maybe it is the opportunity of COVID to get a different underrepresented communities to become more engaged in understanding, being trained about clinical trials, and helping to get the word out through all the networks of the Office of Minority Health. It may not be the research piece, but the engagement. And the other thing is, I think the technology needs to be focused on the use of the telephones, the cell phones, more than the computers until we get the digital divide. And I was thinking in communities, one of the ways to get to people is through the public library system. I think that's, or the senior citizen centers, besides community health centers or the physician, the hospitals, maybe, I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. Where do people go with families outside of the home if they don't have computer systems that are, or just how can you get brief messages, text messages? It's the cell phones, I think.
Is there data from the Parkinson's study with the Apple Watch?
Yeah.
I mean,
well, I will be heading back into the main room in about.
Oh, okay.
So.
Thank you, Melvin.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I don't know if they're moving us right now, but that's a wonderful discussion. So many questions, remain, and I hope we'll get more chance to have that dialogue. Thank you all for participating in this session. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for leading it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Pleasure learning from all of you. Thank you so much.